Good afternoon, welcome. My name is Kevin Schofield. I'm here to introduce and welcome Nicholas Christakis and James Fowler, who are visiting us as part of the Microsoft Research Visiting Speaker Series. They're here today to discuss Connected, the surprising power of our social networks and how they shape our lives. In Connected, the authors explain why emotions are contagious, how health behaviors spread, why the rich get richer, even how we find and choose our partners. Nicholas Christakis, both MD and PhD, is a professor of Harvard University with joint appointments in the departments of healthcare policy, sociology, and medicine, and in 2009 was named one of Times Magazine's 100 most influential people in the world. James Fowler, PhD, is an associate professor at the University of California, San Diego, in the Department of Political Science and the Center for Wireless and Population Health Systems. Christakis and Fowler's research has appeared on NPR's Science Friday, the New York Times, Washington Post, and USA Today, as well as the Oprah Winfrey Show, Good Morning America, Today, and the Colbert Report. So please join me in welcoming Nicholas Christakis and James Fowler to Microsoft to discuss Connected, the surprising power of our social networks and how they shape our lives.
Yeah, thank you very much for that introduction. When most people hear that we're going to be talking about social networks, they of course think about the online variety, which of course are a very recent phenomenon historically. And what James and I are interested in, although we will be speaking a not trivial amount of time about online networks, is a more fundamental reality that human beings have been embedded in social networks of very tremendous and very specific complexity since time immemorial, since we emerged from the African savannah. And social networks, in fact, are such intricate things of beauty, and they're so elaborate and so complex and so ubiquitous, in fact, that they beg a certain set of questions. What purpose do they serve? How do they form? How do they work? What do they mean for our lives? What does it mean for us as individuals? What does it mean for us as collectivities that we are embedded in these networks that have very particular kinds of rules that govern their form and their function? Now, James and I have been obsessed with this topic together for 7 years, but even before that, we were each engaged. And before we started collaborating 7 years ago, we were studying two problems which in a minute should seem related to you, but which may seem unrelated. I was interested in the widower effect, or the problem of dying of a broken heart, which is a classic problem in epidemiology and in demography. And James was interested in the problem of voting. Why do people vote? And what would these two, which is a classic problem in political science. And in my work, I had been looking at how it is that illness or death in one person might cause illness or death in another. So if I die, how does my wife's risk of death go up? How and why? And if you think about it, that's a very simple dyadic network. And I was interested in how some health-related phenomenon in me might spread and cause some health-related phenomenon in my partner. And I had spent quite a bit of time studying this, and at some point in the mid-1990s, I began to be interested in the possibility that it wasn't just dyadic effects that could happen, but hyperdyadic effects, because all these little dyads could agglomerate to form larger structures, such that if my wife died, it affects me, then I affect my brother affects his coworker, and you can have these spreading processes on networks. And this is where I was in 2002, where I gave a talk at Harvard and was heard by a colleague of ours who introduced me to James.
Yeah, so that colleague is Gary King. He turned out to be my advisor. I was a political science graduate student at the time working on the question of why do people vote? If you think about the election in 2000 between Al Gore and Bush, what we saw was that it was the closest election in our history. And so there was a sense that every vote counted. But if you think about those 700 people in Florida who decided the outcome of the election, try to think about what would have happened if any one of those people decided not to vote. How would the outcome have been different? Well, the outcome wouldn't have been different. And if the outcome wouldn't have been different, then from the point of view of individual choice, why does anyone ever vote? And so I was struggling with this problem the way political scientists have for hundreds of years. And I drifted to sleep, and then I had a pop culture moment, remembering that Breck shampoo commercial from the 1970s, where a woman becomes so enthralled with her shampoo that she decides to tell two friends, and the screen splits into two. And then each of them tell two friends, and the screen splits into four, and so on, and so on, and so on. And pretty soon, a bunch of women are all using Breck shampoo. And it occurred to me that one of the reasons why political scientists have had such a hard time with this question of why we vote is because they've thought about this question as though we are islands. We are Robinson Crusoe and not influenced by the other people. And so I began to think about what would happen if voting spread in networks from person to person to person. And that's when Gary King, when he heard Nicholas give his talk about the problem that he was trying to think about, he told me, you guys are thinking about the same problem. You guys really need to get together.
Yeah, and so in fact, one of the examples that we give in the book, and one of the things we talk about in the book, is that these social networks function efficiently in the background, these social networks in which we're embedded, to foster all kinds of collaborative unions. Not just between co-authors, because we began as friends of friends, but as we talk about in the book, for instance, between partners. And one of the very deep functions we think of networks is, in fact, to function to find people partners. In fact, one of the arguments we make in the book is that if you're single right now, there's a 70% chance you're going to wind up marrying a friend or a friend of a friend or a friend of a friend of a friend. Just like some pathogen that's infecting your friend's friend right now is winding its way inexorably to you, even though you don't know it and you're well at the moment. There is a person out there who is your intended, who you're unaware of right now, but you will inexorably meet. And we talk a little bit about, we use this example to motivate a whole class of phenomena that we examine in networks. And in fact, James and I believe, are much more productive having been introduced than either of us would have been separately. And in fact, the whole has come to be greater than the sum of its parts, which is another theme we're going to be engaging today. So we're going to have a sequence of things we're going to talk about, and we're going to kind of take turns. We're going to open with some remarks on purpose-driven networks, so artificially designed or deliberately designed networks. We're going to talk about some canonical examples. Then we're going to segue and talk about natural human networks, which have a rather different topology and a rather different function. By topology, I mean architecture or structure of the ties. And then we're going to talk about some of our work on the role of evolution, because invariably or inevitably, James and I became interested in some of the genetic rules that govern the structure of human social networks. I should say there are technological, biological, psychological, social, and genetic kinds of processes that guide the structure of networks, all of which we discuss in the book. And then we're going to make a bunch of remarks. This will actually be sort of at least a third or half of the talk on our hyper-connected world and the ways in which online networks are the same but different than offline networks. And finally, we'll close with some bigger remarks, sort of opening up onto some basic philosophical questions about how we think social networks are shaping our lives.
Right, so first of all, let's talk about networks that we form with a specific purpose in mind. Okay, so you guys are all sitting in rows here, and you can imagine there's a lot of heavy bricks on one side of the room, and we need to get those heavy bricks over to the other side of the room. Now, one possibility is that we all just run willy-nilly, and each of us go and grab a brick and trudge it all the way over to the other room, and we're running around like chickens with our heads cut off. Or we could organize ourselves in some way to make this process easier so that everyone can participate and do so in a way that minimizes the amount of energy that we spend. So what's one possible idea for how we do this? We could actually use what's called a bucket brigade. And this is the simplest kind of network, where here what we have is representations where each circle is a person or a node, and each line is a relationship. And the relationship here is who you're closest to in line. And so one of you can pick up the brick and hand it to the person next to you, and these bricks will flow in the direction of the other side of the room, which is where we want to get them. Now, if it's a regular bucket brigade where we have buckets and we're getting water from a river to a burning house, for example, those buckets can actually flow back and forth in this very simple network. And what's interesting here is that your actions don't just influence the person that you're next to. They influence everyone up and down the line. They influence your friends. We can think of your friend in this person as the person next to you, but they also influence your friend's friends. You pass the bucket to the first person, and the first person passes the bucket to the second person. And as long as the line is, that's how many degrees of separation there are between all the people in this particular structure. Now, there's another kind of network structure that we use before the internet in order to get as much information as possible to as wide a group of people as possible. So say a school says they're going to close because there's snow, and you want to get this information out to a bunch of parents early in the morning so they don't drive their kids in. Well, one way that you can solve this problem is to assign someone to initiate an information cascade, where one person will call two other people, each of them will call two other people, each of them will call two other people, and so on. This is like the brick girl, right? This is every social marketer's dream, to find this central individual who's going to start using their product, and suddenly there'll be millions of people involved.
Actually, this structure.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, actually, this structure could also be then turned on its head. I mean, we regard this as a canonical structure and used like in a Ponzi scheme. But now, instead of information flowing downstream, money flows up to the central individual. We should also mention that, for example, we could have shown you an image of 100 nodes and 99 ties. This image has 100 nodes and 99 ties. The same 100 people, same number of ties,